Greetings everyone! My name is FFVII and I welcome you to my new series Game Analysis, where I analyze a specific subject in or a certain part of a game. For example, a trailer, game mechanic, or the question of why a game failed or succeeded. In today's episode, I'll tackle the Final Fantasy VII Remake Reveal trailer shown at E3 2015. I know I'm way too late to the party, and this trailer has already been analyzed to death. However, I still think there are a few points that haven't been addressed yet. Moreover, this is a great opportunity for me to practice the art of analyzing things for future and more up-to-date analyses. So please bear with me while I most likely go over several points already discussed by other people. Now, without further delay, let's dive right into it. Let's have a look at the narration first. The words are chosen very carefully and make extensive use of subtle metaphors. The narration as a whole is very meta in the sense that it describes the original game, the compilation and the remake, as well as speaks to the audience directly. Let me explain what I mean by going through it sentence by sentence.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky.
The foreboding sky refers to meteor which was looming menacingly in the skies over Gaia during the last third of the game. We refers here to the cast of the original game as well as the players. Both were looking at the burning meteor during the last portion of the game. Long ago, of course, describes the 18 years it has been since the original game came out on a PS1 in 1997. As a nice side effect, it could also mean that it has been a long time since the characters experienced meteor fall, which might hint at a sequel. Keep in mind that at this point, the audience has no idea that the narrator is talking directly to them. Nice red herring there, Square Enix.
The memory of the star that threatened all burns eternal in our hearts.
This is an elaboration on the memory of meteor. The memory of the star that threatened all essentially refers to the game itself. The star that threatened all portion describes meteor not destroying all life in the end, thanks to the combined effort of the characters, Holy and the livestream, and therefore acknowledges the sequels and doubles down on the red herring for yet another sequel. On a meta level, the phrase burns eternal in our hearts describes the passionate love the fans still have for Final Fantasy VII to this day.
In its wake came an age of silence.
This most likely refers to almost 2 decades of no information on or even flat out denial of a possible remake. Other games in the franchise did get a proper remake, like 1 through 4. No, we don't talk about the phone versions of 5 and 6. Final Fantasy VII only got ported to and slightly remastered 4 different platforms so far.
Yet with each fond remembrance, we knew those encountered were not forgotten.
Here, they allude to the different sequels and prequels within the Final Fantasy VII universe, also called the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. We know Square Enix did not forget all the beloved characters, since they kept delving deeper into their backstories, future adventures, and the lore as a whole.
That someday we would see them again.
The continuous expansion of the compilation kept up the hope for a possible remake in the future. One might also go as far as seeing this as a proper remake being inevitable. Now, the red herring established at the beginning starts to crumble. Since there's more evidence, the narrator talks to the audience directly. Though it's still not 100% clear that this is a trailer for a remake or just another compilation entry.
Perhaps it was no more than wishful thinking.
And now we get right into remake territory. Wishful thinking flat out refers to the remake. However, some people might still have the secret cliffhanger ending of Dirge of Cerberus in their minds, so it could still just be another sequel.
But after the long calm, there are now the beginnings of a stir.
The long calm being of course those 18 years, and this very trailer is the beginning of a stir that will evolve into a hurricane of emotions during the next dozen or so seconds, which will continue in the years to come, for better or worse.
The reunion at hand may bring joy. It may bring fear.
The reunion here refers to 3 things. The reunion of Final Fantasy VII fans in the world of the original game, and of course the concept of the Genova reunion, which is one of the central themes in the game. The second part of this sentence heavily alludes to the apprehension many fans will have about the remake. Will it be good? What will change? Will it still feel like the original? Since Square Enix already have plans for many changes, it's heavy foreshadowing of the numerous news and reactions people will have towards every new bit of information after this trailer. Action-based combat, multi-part release.
But let us embrace whatever it brings.
However, whether the remake or those changes will be good or bad, we, the players, should be happy that Square Enix finally are creating this remake. They know that the more information about the remake gets out, the more split the fanbase will be. And boy, were they right. Oh man.
For they are coming back.
They refers of course to the original cast of the original game. Especially since we see Cloud and Barret in their original attire and the Buster Sword is presented in its original design, whereas in all compilation titles the weapon sported that weird golden guard of the sword's hilt. This is probably the final and strongest evidence of this trailer being about a remake and not another compilation entry.
At last, the promise has been made.
With this, Square Enix fully commits to this monumental and arduous task. I also think they used the word promise deliberately to reference Cloud's promise to Tifa 7 years prior to the events in the game, further linking this trailer to the original Final Fantasy VII. With this out of the way, we'll now dive even deeper into this trailer and analyze its visual aspect, especially all the references that are scattered all over the place. Let's start with the very first scene, where a white dove soars through a cloudy sky and towards what seems to be a foggy or air-polluted construction site. We've just begun and there's so much to unpack here. The symbolism of doves is quite extensive, so I'll try to condense this as much as possible. Doves are commonly associated with the following terms: love, grace, promise, devotion, divinity, holiness, sacrifice, maternal, ascension, messenger, hopefulness and purification. The most applicable ones here are promise, devotion, sacrifice, messenger and hopefulness. With this in mind, this scene can be interpreted as a hopeful message and promise to the fans of the original game. We heard your plea and we promise to deliver the long-awaited remake. Devotion and sacrifice refer to the Business Division 1 staff who are working hard on the remake with devotion while sacrificing several years of their lives to fulfill Square Enix's promise. On a deeper level, this dove could also be a reference to Aerith, as she, knowingly or not, sacrifices herself to someone holy before Sephiroth steps in, and by keeping her conscience intact when returning to the livestream, she ascends to a higher plane of existence. This of course is only my interpretation and you're free to disagree and voice your own take on this. At the very end of the scene, they show a construction site, most likely the unfinished Midgar highway Cloud and the others are standing on before leaving Midgar, which could be a metaphor for the remake being under construction. Both the dove and this construction site could therefore convey the following message: we promise the remake is under construction. On the other hand, it could also be the first visual red herring, because the scene resembles one of the last shots shown during the Advent Children's introduction narration by Marlene. There, the camera follows a flock of birds, presumably also doves, from the depths of the destroyed Midgar towards a cloudy sky. The imagery looks very similar, especially the color scheme consisting of grey metal and white clouds. However, there are a few differences in this imagery. The panning direction is reversed, there's destruction instead of construction, and the camera follows a flock of birds instead of just one. Maybe that's exactly the point, to allude to this scene from Advent Children while turning every element upside down. Next up is the shot of a train line station table which reads South Edge. This probably refers to the station on the south end of Midgar, opposite of North Edge Station, where Cloud and Avalanche start their very first bombing mission. If you take a close look at the text above the doorway Cloud emerges from right before meeting up with the others, it clearly reads North Edge Station. It's also an ingenious red herring for another compilation title, because Edge is widely known to be the town outside of Midgar. Both Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus partly take place there. But if you look closely, the curved lines on the right side most likely represent the border of Midgar and one of the reactors. Remember, North Edge Station is also closely situated to a reactor. In the following shot, passengers leave the train and what's interesting is that the only clearly visible person in this shot is a black man, who most likely invokes memories of Barret, especially since his Advent Children outfit also has a similar jacket. You could even go as far as thinking of that black guy being Barret's son. I think this was done on purpose to either foreshadow Barret's appearance at the end of the trailer or yet again to allude to another compilation title. Remember, There are hardly any black people in FF7's world, so the instant comparison to Barrett isn't as far-fetched. Now it starts to get interesting. The following two shots show parts of the upper plate of Midgar. Even though there are skyscrapers which are never seen in the original game or in the compilation, the huge pipes running between almost everything are one of the numerous trademarks of Midgar. If you compare those two shots with an image of the Midgar we all know, you can see the pipes and the other buildings in both versions of Midgar. I'm assuming the scale of Midgar in the remake trailer is of much greater magnitude than its original counterpart. This could explain the additional skyscrapers. Another trademark of Midgar is the polluted air, which is represented by this faint but clearly visible fog between the buildings. What's interesting to note here is the daylight. In the original game, Midgar was cast in darkness at all times due to the heavy pollution in the atmosphere above. Those scenes in the trailer could therefore be from the past where the pollution wasn't as bad as it is now. On the right side of the first shot, you can clearly see those green highway signs. The one on the left reads Center Gate 6, COM 51 and Junon 133. Another piece of evidence we're in Midgar. In the next shot, we see those signs much clearer. The right one says 7th Gate 1 mile and is designated as highway number 12. Another hint at FF7. Seeing the distance descriptors of 7th Gate and Center Gate, I'm inclined to believe that this part of Midgar is closer to the border than the center of the city. Center Gate, which probably refers to the exit near Shinra headquarters, is 6 miles away, and 7th Gate, which in turn most likely refers to the exit out of Midgar in Sector 7, is only 1 mile away. If we compare old and new Midgar again, there is clearly a huge difference in scope. In old Midgar, a brisk walk from the center to the outer rim seems to only take about 15 minutes, whereas new Midgar actually feels like a real-world metropolis. Now, there are two other signs in this second shot, which unfortunately are very blurry. The one in the middle shows 3 different exits: Junon, highway number 4, COM, highway number 17, and Center Gate, highway number 3. It's hard to read, but with the magic of a little post-processing, we can see the text a bit clearer. Same goes with the one on the upper highway. There it seems to say 8th Gate, because the first of those 4 kanjis represents the number 8, and if you look closely, the blurry text underneath could represent 8th Gate. The mile descriptor underneath is almost impossible to make out, but it might also say 1 mile. What's clearly visible, however, is the highway number, which reads 17. This makes sense since it runs into the same direction as the one for COM, which is also assigned to highway number 17. Those signs and directions actually make a lot of sense. If we look at the world map from the original game and draw the highways on top of it by taking all those previously mentioned directions into account, everything aligns perfectly. The other signs show speed limit and other things unrelated to anything other than just the traffic, and is therefore of no further interest for this analysis. However, there are a few other things to point out. Underneath the highway in the middle, you can see some movie and theater billboards. One of them reads Valentina and shows a famous depiction of the character Aya Brea from the PSP game The Third Birthday, a sequel to Parasite Eve 2, which was also produced by Yoshinori Kitase, the director of the original FF7, now producer of the FF7 Remake, and the one that is responsible for this very trailer. Nice advertisement there, buddy! Aya Brea isn't the only reference on this billboard, however. Let me take you back to the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, where Cloud meets Aerith for the very first time. See the famous billboards on the left and in the back? If you combine the visible text on both, it reads My Bloody Valentine vertically and Loveless horizontally. This is yet another reference, and a very blunt one at that. Loveless is the second studio album by the Irish rock band My Bloody Valentine, which released on November 4th, 1991, almost 5 years and 3 months before the release of Final Fantasy VII in Japan on January 31st, 1997. Someone on the development team seemed to love that album so much that it made its way into the final game this prominently. And for Crisis Core, they even created a whole play out of it, with a certain unnecessary someone reciting passage after passage throughout the game. Valentina is a pretty obvious reference to Valentine, and the layout and design of both billboards are very similar. Vertical text on the left, Hot Girl on the right, and possibly a horizontal text on the bottom, which we unfortunately can see on the Aya Brea billboard. To sum it up, A billboard which references 2 games at the same time, and one of those references is in itself a reference.
Referenceception!
Those cars driving along the highway are sporting designs of other vehicles in the FF7 world. Especially the second one, which closely resembles the pickup model used by Yazoo and Laws in the movie Advent Children to transport the kids to the Forgotten Capital. Both the pickup and the 2 small cars can also be seen in the PS3 technical demo version of the FF7 intro cinematic, as well as in Crisis Core's secret ending, while the camera zooms away from Aerith. Weirdly enough, the original intro FMV contains 2 completely different vehicles. Before we advance to the next scene, did you see the railroad on the right side? I think it's a nice tie-in to the previous scene with the passengers getting off the train. In the next scene, we see a familiar cargo train riding along this elevated railroad. This one looks exactly like the one arriving at North Edge Station in the original game's intro sequence, where Cloud and Avalanche start their first bombing mission. The same train can of course be seen in any rendition of this scene, be it the one from the PS3 technical demo or the secret ending FMV in Crisis Core. The locomotive for passenger trains, as seen at the Sector 7 slum train station, is also one and the same. As you can see in this comparison, the locomotive sports the same stylish exhaust-like pipes, the 3 cars behind it have the same 3 round hatches and very similar railing on the top, and the shapes in general match up perfectly. On a side note, here the pollution is much more visible, most likely because we're close to the ground of the upper plate. Let's shift our focus to the playground. If you look closely, it very much resembles the one in Sector 6, where Aerith and Cloud have their little heart-to-heart chat. The slide is there, a small half-spherical thing, the swings, as well as the fence. The slide, however, is shaped a little bit differently in the remake trailer and looks more like the seashell-shaped huts in the City of the Ancients. Because of this, and because we're still on the upper plate, this playground here is definitely not the HD version of the one we know from Sector 7. My guess is that this similarity is deliberate nod to the aforementioned location, the Ancients, and therefore Aerith, since she's connected to both locations. In the next shot, we see a girl sliding down the slide. During the first few frames, we have a clear sight on the picture on her shirt, which looks like a dolphin jumping through a hoop. Now, let me pull up an artwork of Mr. Dolphin, drawn by Tetsuya Nomura-san himself. See the similarities? I find it also fitting that a little girl is wearing this shirt, since Priscilla, Mr. Dolphin's trainer, is also a little girl, or at least a young teenager, since she seems to be 13 years old according to this artwork here. No, the girl in this trailer is not Priscilla. She's younger, maybe around 8, and doesn't live in Juneau. Heck, just look at the hair color. Unless she dyed her hair brown and moved from Midgard to Juneau. While the girl is landing on the ground, we see 2 boys battling each other with swords. The blonde one uses what seems to resemble one of the small fusion sword parts that Cloud uses in Advent Children. The black kid, on the other hand, holds one that looks more like Cloud's original Buster Sword, albeit a much smaller version. In the background, the air pollution from the surrounding pipes and reactor parts are even more visible here. The next shot shows a close-up of the girl's right eye, most likely gazing at the closest Mako reactor, which is in the process of exhausting residual Mako energy. The shot right after confirms this. You can see the girl slightly looking up and into the distance, while one of the boys, presumably the blonde one, points towards something elevated in the distance. If we compare the elevation levels of the upper plate and the Mako reactor exhausts, it matches the angle of the boy's arm. By the way, if we take this to pinpoint their location on the plate, we see that the playground is much closer to the center, which means the skyscrapers must be near the center also. But take this with a grain of salt, since we don't know if the scale of Advent Children's Midgard will be comparable to the one in the remake. Another indication of a Mako reactor erupting is the withering flower in the foreground. When a Mako reactor exhausts this green residual, it sucks a huge amount of fresh Mako from the ground, which leads to plants dying in spades in the surrounding area. I think it's a bit odd that there are wild flowers blooming on the upper plate, but let's not read too much into this. Even though I'm already constantly doing that in this analysis, but please don't tell anyone. The withering flower might also be, again, a metaphor for Aerith. She sells flowers, which she grows in the church and in the garden behind her house, which most likely only grow because of her presence and care. Flowers are a big part of her, also because she's so much attached to nature in general. A flower withering away is therefore a strong reference to her demise at the end of Disc 1 in the original game. In the next scene, we seem to witness an infiltration mission into a Mako processing facility. There are 4 shots total in this scene. The first one just shows the immediate surroundings. Nothing much of importance here besides more evidence that we're in Midgar. The green hue of the scene hints at Mako energy. The next 2 shots show 2 armed infiltrators, which don't resemble any type of soldier or infantry we know from the original game or the compilation titles released in the West. Their apparel does show some features similar to other known outfits like the Shinra infantrymen, the Wutai soldiers from Crisis Core and soldiers from the original Avalanche as shown in Before Crisis. The cap-like headwear seems to be an original design, but other parts can be found on the outfits of the aforementioned units, like the shoulder armor, the goggles, the waist bags, red armband, the rifle, the gloves and the kneecap protectors. What's really throwing me off here are the swords both soldiers have strapped vertically along the left side of their backs. As far as I know, there haven't been any soldiers, fighters or warriors using rifles and swords. My guess is they represent heavily redesigned soldiers from the original Avalanche from Before Crisis. Of course, they could just be a deliberate conglomerate of known soldier types to further hint at the FF7 universe, while still keeping us in the dark about what the heck this trailer is about. On a side note, this area reminds me of this one screen in the original game's reactor. The stairs and railing look alike and the whole architecture in general gives off similar vibes. The last shot shows a helicopter with an engaged searchlight, further hinting at this being an infiltration. On top of that, helicopters are not a rare sight in the FF7 universe. An interesting but not really relevant observation is that the whole scene very much feels like a scene from a Metal Gear Solid game trailer. Wouldn't you agree? What follows now are a series of different shots showing more familiar imagery. First up is a narrow alleyway. Even if it looks different, it reminds me of the alley we first see Aerith in the intro FMV of the original game. 2 things to note here are the Shinra logo on this trash can container thingy on the left, the first direct reference to FF7, and the green glow of Mako energy shining through the pipes on the right. The next scene is a blatant and obvious reference to Aerith and Sephiroth's duality of life and death. Beautiful blooming flowers which were cut down and thrown away, as well as a black feather floating down onto the puddle, creating ripples as it lands. To me, this is a nice reference to Aerith's death scene, where Sephiroth descends from above to kill her, just like the black feather. Cut down flowers represent the sapped Aerith, and the ripples in the puddle are a metaphor for the ramifications this act of violence has. The flowers also have a striking resemblance to the ones found in Aerith's church and the garden by her house. The black feather alone is not the only reference to Sephiroth in this scene. As an aside, Sephiroth didn't have the black wing until Advent Children, yet another red herring to a possible compilation title. Anyway, just before the feather hits the water and after the ripples fade away, we can spot an angel statue reflecting off the puddle's surface, of which we only see one wing. A one-winged angel, so to speak. The following shot shows a wide shot of Midgar, which is easily recognizable from the huge pipes and the gigantic floodlights, as well as the green glow and pollution fog everywhere. Its round shape and the architecture of the city in the lower half also contribute to this. Heck, what I am even trying to analyze here. This is hard evidence of Final Fantasy VII right into our faces. It's almost perfect how the narration line, "no more than wishful thinking," is accompanying this shot of a remade Midgar. What more evidence for a proper remake do we need? Now follows a long camera pan from underneath the upper plate all the way down to the bottom of the slums, where we see Cloud and Barret from behind walking through a crowd of people probably on their way to their first bombing mission. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are a lot of details in here to work with. First, we see the upper plates from underneath. There are numerous service walkways like the ones we traversed through on our way to the Sector 5 reactor in the original game. If you look closely, we can spot the slums between the walkways hundreds of feet down below. A few moments later, there are more doves flying across the scenery. Like in the opening scene, they most likely are a metaphor for a hopeful message and a promise, especially in combination with the narrator mentioning the beginnings of a stir, which, as already discussed earlier in this video, most likely refers to this very trailer and therefore its promise of a remake. Right after, we can spot 2 more familiar things, The first one is the train, which travels in a spiral around the central pillar towards the bottom. This is very reminiscent of that one FMV after Avalanche's first mission. The other one is a sector pillar, well, one of two, with a spiraling walkway and the circular top floor containing the pillar's control panel. This might even be the Sector 7 pillar, the very one Shinra blows up to crush Sector 7. If so, the part of the slums Cloud and Barrett will walk through in a few moments matches up the area outside Tifa's bar, 7th Heaven, almost perfectly location-wise. More evidence they're on their way to their first bombing mission. If we study the environment closely, we can make out a trench between the buildings, which looks similar to the path from the 7th Heaven to the train station, even if we can't see the ladder in the trailer. Now, the camera pans to the bottom inside the slums, where we see Cloud and Barrett walking through the streets. I must say that they look very faithful to their original designs, albeit with a few more details, like Barrett's leg bags, the longer gun arm, which has a similar arm attachment to the one he uses in Advent Children, the edged lines in the boss's sword, and Cloud's shorter hair. I also scanned the surroundings for more hidden items or people, but there's nothing of interest besides several NPC clones, like the black guy from the train station earlier in this trailer, the woman with the chin-long hair and short-sleeved light grey shirt, also women with chin-long hair in general. You can see they really didn't have much time to produce this trailer and used excessive human cloning to cut corners. I just hope the NPC cloning epidemic isn't as prevalent in the remake. Just before Barrett enters the screen, we can see several signs further down the road. But again, I couldn't spot anything of interest. Maybe you can, and if so, please let us know in the comments down below. The last thing I want to point out is that one guy on the far right next to one of those clone girls. He seems to wear a red coat, has black short hair and presumably sunglasses. It's hard to make out properly. Who does that remind you of? Correct! Auron from Final Fantasy X. Whether this is a deliberate Easter egg or just mere coincidence, I can't tell you. But since Kazushige Nojima-san himself already created a link between Final Fantasy VII and X, it's not too far-fetched to be a deliberate Easter egg. I think this trailer did a spectacular job at keeping the audience guessing until the very end. It started off with very vague imagery and narration and never gave away too much. Sure, it was clear very early on that it has something to do with Final Fantasy VII. However, it being about the actual long-awaited remake was only very evident when Cloud and Barrett entered the scene and got confirmed with a modern FF7 logo and the word remake at the very end. Notice how they didn't even once show or mention the actual title, as in Final Fantasy VII. They never showed too much, almost nothing explicit, and used many metaphors, ambiguous phrases with double meanings, hints and Easter eggs. On top of that, they managed to incorporate several red herrings to keep the audience second guessing the possibility of a remake. They even used a track straight out of the movie Advent Children. That's also most likely why those infamous first 3 notes of the original game's opening track, combined with the reveal of the first 2 playable characters, had such an impact, because it served as a stark contrast to the ambiguous part before. As much as I praise this trailer and its presence at E3 2015, it would have been even more impactful if they didn't hint at the remake at the E3 Sony press conference at all. But unfortunately, they did. There was some livestream imagery present on the curved screen, and the show host Adam Boyce practically gave it away with his announcement speech.
Now, many years ago, Square Enix released a groundbreaking title that went on to become one of the most beloved games in PlayStation and video game history. Tonight, I am proud to announce that by popular demand, we have a very special treat for everyone.
Such a shame. Ah well, the trailer was a huge success either way, so why am I complaining again? Alright, this wraps up the first episode of Game Analysis. I hope you enjoyed my deep dive into the depths and guts of this trailer, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about my in-depth analysis. Let me know if there's something I missed or overlooked. Remember that this whole video is just based on other already published analyses as well as my own personal findings and conclusions. You're free to disagree with me and share your counterpoints. Let's have a discussion in the comment section down below. That being said, thank you so much for listening in, and I hope to see you again in the next episode of Game Analysis. And always remember, Stay safe and take care. FFVII signing off.